Noah didn't want to accept the simplest explanation, that Tate was just selfish, cruel in the quiet, polished way that left no bruises anyone else could see. It was too final, too unforgiving. If that were true, then everything Noah had held onto for years, every excuse, every softened edge, every careful reinterpretation would collapse into something humiliatingly naive. So instead he reached for the other explanation, the one that felt heavier but kinder. The seizures. They had always been there, woven into Tate's life like something inevitable, something no one could quite fix but everyone learned to live around. And Noah had lived around them more closely than anyone. 22 years of shared space, sleeping beside him, waking beside him, existing in that quiet, unspoken closeness that blurred the line between intimacy and something deeper, something neither of them had ever fully named. And in all those years, the seizures had never been abstracted. They were physical, immediate. Noah would wake in the dark, disoriented at first, thinking it was a dream, until he realized it was his own body being moved, jolted by the force of Tate behind him. An arm thrown over him too tightly, muscles locking, the unmistakable rhythm of something going wrong beneath the surface. There was no warning, no gentle lead-up. Just the sudden, terrifying loss of control in someone who, during the day, seemed to have complete command over everything. Tate never talked about it afterward, not really. He would brush it off, dismiss it with a kind of careless indifference that made it seem smaller than it was, like it didn't matter, it didn't define anything about him. Talia didn't treat it that way. Noah could still hear her voice from that phone call years ago when he was at Brown University, steady, measured, but threaded with something she couldn't quite hide. Tate's seizures come in cycles, she had said, and when they're bad, he changes. At the time, Noah hadn't pushed her to explain, maybe because some part of him already understood. 2, 7, 13, 15, 25. The ages sat in his mind like markers, dividing Tate's life into versions of himself. Not completely different people, but not entirely the same either. Each shift was subtle enough that the world adjusted without question, but significant enough that Noah, who had been there for all of it, couldn't pretend nothing had changed. At 15, it had been obvious in hindsight. That was when something in Tate hardened. Before, he had been reckless but open, impulsive but still emotionally accessible in ways that felt real. After, he became sharper, more controlled. His charm turned intentional. His confidence took on an edge, like it was something he wielded instead of something that simply existed. It hadn't made him less likable. If anything, it made him more magnetic, but it had made him harder to reach. And Noah had adjusted the way he always did. He told himself it was just growing up, just the natural shift from boy to something closer to a man. Tate was 15, and it was as though a switch had flipped inside him. The outgoing, emotionally expressive boy Noah had known began to disappear. In his place was someone more guarded, more private, and increasingly difficult to read. Tate still cared deeply about the people closest to him, but he stopped expressing those feelings as openly. He became more selective about what he shared and who he trusted with his emotions. Then, at 19, Noah noticed another change. Tate became even more reserved and emotionally avoidant. Instead of confronting difficult feelings, he often withdrew from them. Rather than talking through conflict or vulnerability, he seemed to distance himself, convincing himself that leaving or shutting down was easier than facing painful conversations. To Noah, it felt as though Tate had slowly built walls around himself over the years. The boy who had once desperately needed closeness had become a young man who seemed determined to keep his emotions under lock and key. That was why June 2nd hurt so profoundly. Looking back, Noah could almost see the progression. The emotional withdrawal that began in Tate's teenage years eventually culminated in the way he ended their relationship, not with a conversation but with silence. Instead of saying goodbye, Tate simply left. To Noah, that wasn't an impulsive decision. It felt like the final stage of a personality that had gradually become more emotionally avoidant, until walking away seemed easier than confronting the pain of saying goodbye. At 25, that was different. That wasn't growth, that was a fracture. It had come at the worst possible time, layered over grief that should have anchored Tate instead of destabilized him. His favorite uncle is gone, leaving a hollow space in the family that no one knew how to fill. It should have forced Tate to slow down, to feel something real, to confront the weight of loss in a way that couldn't be avoided. Instead, it was like something in him snapped in the opposite direction. The seizures became worse, Talia had said, the worst yet, and after that, she had trailed off like even she didn't know how to finish the sentence. Noah did. After that, Tate wasn't Tate anymore. Not in the way Noah had known him. The version of him that had existed through high school, the charismatic, self-assured, almost effortlessly captivating person who could make Noah feel seen with just a glance, that version hadn't just evolved. It had vanished forever. replaced by someone who looked the same, sounded the same, moved through the world with the same practiced ease but felt different, colder, more distant. Like everything genuine had been stripped down and rebuilt into something functional instead of something real. And now, standing on the edge of Tate's wedding, Noah felt that absence more sharply than ever. Because this performance of normalcy, of happiness, of moving forward, felt disconnected from everything that had come before. From the boy Noah had grown up with. From the person he had loved in ways he had never been able to fully admit. It felt like watching a stranger step into a life that used to belong to someone else. And Tate's seizures, God, Noah wanted them to be the answer. He wanted to believe that something neurological, something beyond Tate's control had altered him in ways that explained all of this. That the distance, the avoidance, the way Tate replaced grief with intimacy weren't choices but consequences. That Tate wasn't rejecting people, he was simply no longer capable of connecting the way he once had. Because that version of the story was survivable. That version meant Noah hadn't been foolish to hold on for so long. It meant the person he loved hadn't chosen to become unreachable, he had just lost the ability to be reached. But even as Noah held onto that explanation, turning it over and over until it almost felt solid, there was still something underneath it. Something quieter, sharper, harder to ignore. Because the seizures didn't explain everything. They didn't explain the precision of Tate's behavior, the way he could be exactly what a situation required when it benefited him, the way he avoided certain moments with almost strategic timing, slipping away when things got too real, reappearing when it was safe again. That wasn't confusion, that wasn't incapacity. That was awareness, and awareness meant choice. The thought pressed in on Noah, unwelcome but persistent. Maybe the seizures had changed Tate, maybe they had reshaped parts of him in ways no one fully understood, but they hadn't erased him. And if they hadn't erased him, then somewhere in all of this, in the distance, in the avoidance, in the carefully chosen moments of presence and absence, Tate was still there, still choosing, still deciding. It meant Noah was left with something far more complicated than he wanted. Not a single explanation, but two, layered over each other in ways that refused to separate cleanly. A boy who had changed, and a man who had decided what to do with that change. Noah didn't know which part hurt more. The worst fracture, if Noah was honest with himself, hadn't been at 25, it had been 15. There was a clean line in his memory, before and after Tate's 15th birthday, and no matter how much time passed, Noah couldn't blur it. Before Tate had been softer, not weak, not fragile, but open in a way that felt unguarded. He laughed without calculation, got attached without hesitation, and loved in a way that didn't seem to come with conditions. There had been something almost ordinary about him then, something grounded, even when he was difficult or impulsive. Noah had understood him without trying. After 15, that version of Tate was gone. Not all at once, not in a way anyone else would have noticed immediately, but to Noah, who knew the rhythm of him. The shift was unmistakable. It was like watching someone rebuild themselves from the inside out, replacing pieces one by one until the whole thing looked the same from a distance but felt entirely different up close. The seizures had been bad that year, worse than anything before it. Noah remembered the fear of it, the way it lingered in the house even after things went quiet again, but what stayed with him more wasn't just the seizures themselves, it was what followed. Tate hardened, that was the only word that ever felt accurate. The sweetness didn't disappear completely, but it became buried under something sharper. His humor changed first, still quick, still clever, but edged with sarcasm that cut instead of connected. Then came the way he carried himself, like he had something to prove to everyone all the time. Authority didn't sit right with him anymore. He pushed against it reflexively, like defiance had become part of his identity. And then there were the girls. It wasn't just curiosity or normal teenage exploration. It was fixation, intentional, almost strategic. Tate didn't just want attention, he wanted control over it, over them, over how he was seen. He dressed older than he was, spoke as if he had already lived through things no one else their age understood, and moved through social spaces as if he was already years ahead of everyone else. To most people, it worked. That version of Tate was magnetic, confident in a way that drew people in, untouchable in a way that made them want to get closer. He became popular without trying, or at least without looking like he was trying, but Noah saw the effort. He saw how constructed it all was, and more than that, he saw what hadn't changed. Because for all the distance Tate seemed to put between himself and everyone else, he held onto Noah differently after 15, tighter, longer, in ways that didn't always make sense when you looked at everything else he was doing. It was a contradiction Noah never managed to fully explain. Tate could spend hours chasing attention, surrounding himself with people, with girls, with noise, and then turn around and seek Noah out like none of that had been enough. Like it hadn't touched whatever part of him actually needed something real. There were moments, quiet ones, where the edges dropped just enough for Noah to see it. The same pull, the same unspoken reliance that had always existed between them. If anything, it intensified after 15. which didn't fit the version of Tate everyone else saw, or maybe it did in a way Noah didn't want to admit. Because if the seizures had changed Tate, if they had disrupted something fundamental in how he processed emotion, attachment, identity, then maybe that clinginess wasn't just habit. Maybe it was compensation, a way of anchoring himself to the one person who had known him before everything shifted. And the idea of arrested development only complicated it further. If part of Tate had stalled at some earlier version of himself, if some emotional piece hadn't kept up with the rest, then it made a strange kind of sense that he would both push people away and hold on to Noah at the same time. That he could perform with confidence, maturity, and control in the world, while still needing something simpler, something more familiar underneath it all. Noah had felt that duality more than anyone, wanted by Tate in ways that felt real, and kept at a distance in ways that hurt just as much. It wasn't clean, it wasn't easy to categorize, it didn't fit into one explanation or the other. Tate wasn't the boy he had been before 15, and he wasn't just the person he became after. Tate was both layered unevenly, the seams showing only if you knew where to look, and Noah knew exactly where to look. That was the problem, because it meant he couldn't fully hate Tate for what he'd become, not when he could still see the remnants of who he used to be, not when he could still feel in those quieter moments that pull between them that had never completely disappeared. It also meant he couldn't pretend everything was out of Tate's control. The seizures might have changed him, arrested development might have shaped how he held onto things. But the way Tate chose to move through the world after that, the armor, the deflection, the endless reaching for surface-level connection instead of something deeper that still belonged to him. Noah was left holding both truths at once, that Tate had been altered, and that Tate had adapted to that alteration in ways that left Noah both needed and neglected at the same time. Noah woke up with a sharp ache in his neck and the dull, disorienting realization that he had done it again, fallen asleep in the driver's seat like it was a bed he could talk himself into. The car had gone cold sometime in the early morning hours, the kind of June chill that slipped under skin more than clothes, and now his body was stiff from the awkward angle he'd stayed in too long. For a moment he just sat there, hands still resting loosely on the wheel, staring at nothing in particular beyond the windshield. The world outside looked too normal for what today was supposed to be, too bright, too indifferent. The time was 4 a.m. Tate's wedding was in 11 hours. Noah checked the time again, even though he already knew it wouldn't change. It hadn't moved fast enough overnight, but it also hadn't slowed down for him either. It just kept going like it always did, like it didn't care what he felt about it. He exhaled slowly, rubbing the back of his neck, trying to work some feeling back into the stiffness there. He didn't want to go. That was the simplest truth, stripped of everything else. Not because of confusion, not because of nostalgia, not because of anything romantic or complicated people might want to project onto it. He just didn't want to stand there and pretend that what Tate did to him, what Tate didn't do really, was something that could be smoothed over with time and ceremony and polite smiles. Pretend that being left without a conversation, without a face-to-face ending, without even the basic respect of closure, was something Noah was supposed to quietly absorb and move on from as if it didn't matter. It didn't matter, and Noah wasn't willing to dress it up today. He knew what Talia would think. She always read him through the same lens when it came to Tate, like every decision Noah made around her son had to be rooted in something unspoken and romantic and unresolved. As if that was the only explanation that made sense to her. As if two people couldn't matter to each other without it being turned into something sentimental or tragic or unfinished. But that wasn't it, not this time. Noah's refusal had nothing to do with longing. It had everything to do with respect, what had been given and what hadn't. Because Tate hadn't just drifted away. He hadn't just faded out like people sometimes did when life pulled them in different directions. He had cut things clean without looking back, without conversation, without the basic decency of acknowledging that what existed between them, whatever it was called, had weight. Noah had carried that weight alone, for days, maybe longer. So no, he wasn't going to show up today and perform understanding. He wasn't going to stand in a room full of people and act like the absence between them was normal or acceptable or something he had made peace with just because time had passed. If Tate had to deal with questions, awkward silences, curious looks, people wondering why someone so close wasn't there, then that wasn't cruelty, that was a consequence. And then, inevitably, the absence. It wouldn't take long. At first, it would be small, a glance between guests, a pause in conversation that lasted half a second too long. Wait, isn't Noah supposed to be here? I thought they were close. He's not coming. A polite smile from someone who didn't actually know the answer, a shrug that pretended not to care but absolutely did. Maybe someone would assume he was running late, that he got stuck somewhere, that something normal had kept him away. Did anyone text him? Maybe he's just busy. But weddings had a way of amplifying absences, turning them into questions people couldn't stop asking quietly. Talia, if she were there, would notice immediately. She always noticed the gaps first, even when she pretended she didn't. Has anyone seen Noah? She might ask, too casual at first, like she already knew the answer but didn't want to say it out loud. And someone would answer too quickly, too lightly. Oh, I'm sure he'll show. But then the time would pass, and the question would stop sounding casual, it would start sounding pointed. Did he say he wasn't coming? I thought they were close. A pause again, longer this time. And then the kind of whisper that spreads without anyone meaning for it to. Do you think something happened between them? It wouldn't matter what version people told themselves after that. Misunderstanding, timing, distance, personal reasons. Weddings were good at collecting explanations like that, soft, incomplete ones that didn't require anyone to look too closely. But someone would look, someone always did, and Tate would hear it eventually, even if it wasn't said directly to him. He would feel the shift in attention, the subtle recalibration of the room when a name didn't appear where it was expected. Where is he? Someone might ask him quietly, assuming he'd know. Or less carefully. Isn't your buddy Noah supposed to be here? Friend. Noah and Tate had never been friends, never been anything, not even family. The word would land differently depending on who said it. Tate would probably answer something smooth, something controlled. I don't know. Too many questions would leave a residue in the room because weddings didn't handle unanswered questions well. They lingered. They repeated themselves in softer voices, in sideways looks, in the way people leaned slightly closer to fill in gaps that no one officially explained. And Chloe at some point would notice the pattern too, not the question itself, but the way it kept returning. She might tilt her head slightly, quiet but observant. Who's Noah? Someone would ask her later, or she would overhear it framed differently. Oh, he's the one who didn't come, right? And that would be the version that stuck, not the full story, not the history, just the absence. Noah sat there imagining all of it, not because he wanted to be part of it, but because he knew how rooms worked when someone important was missing from them. How quickly silence turned into narrative. He wasn't going to fix that. He wasn't going to step in and smooth it over for Tate or for anyone else. If his absence created discomfort, it only balanced out the comfort he had never been given when Tate left him without a word. Noah finally leaned forward, resting his forearms on the steering wheel. The engine was still warm, the day was still moving, and somewhere without him the questions were already beginning. Noah pushed a hand through his hair, finally leaning back into the seat properly as the stiffness in his spine protested. The car smelled faintly stale, like sleep and old air and decisions delayed too long. He wasn't going to lie about it, not even internally. Tate hadn't left cleanly, he hadn't left gently. He had left in a way that made Noah feel like something meaningful could just be set down and walked away from without explanation. And maybe the hardest part wasn't the absence itself, it was the casualness of it. Like Noah was something that could be paused, shelved, forgotten until convenient again. Noah turned the key in the ignition just long enough to hear the engine hum back to life, not because he was going anywhere yet, but because he needed the sound of something responding to him. Something that still acknowledged he was there. Today didn't belong to him, but he wasn't going to pretend it didn't hurt. Noah drove home with one hand on the wheel and the other resting loosely in his lap. The road familiar enough that he didn't have to think too hard about it. The world outside moved in slow, ordinary pieces, trees, intersections, the dull rhythm of late-morning traffic, completely indifferent to anything he was feeling. By the time he pulled into his driveway, the tension in his neck had started to settle into something more persistent. Not pain exactly anymore, just awareness, of his body, of the day, of everything he was choosing not to do. The anniversary of Joey's death sat in his head like a fixed point he couldn't move away from, no matter how much the rest of the day tried to pull him in different directions. It kept looping back, Joey's voice, Joey's warning, Joey being the one person who had tried to prepare him for everything he didn't want to believe. Noah arrived back at the Rambler at 5 in the morning, the house completely silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the sound of his own uneven breathing. He stepped inside like a ghost, barely turning on any lights. The familiar walls that had once felt like a sanctuary now felt painfully empty. He walked into the living room and went straight to the cupboard, his hands moving with desperation as he searched through bottles and forgotten things tucked away on the shelves. He wasn't looking for a drink to celebrate or relax, he was looking for an escape. He needed to get drunk, really drunk. He needed something, anything, that would quiet the thoughts racing through his head. In just a few hours, Tate would be married. The reality sat like a weight on Noah's chest. Tate, the person who had been beside him for 22 years, the person who had shared a home, routines, secrets, and a bond that neither of them had ever fully understood, would stand at an altar and promise his life to someone else. A woman. Noah swallowed hard as he stared at the bottles in front of him. He had always known, somewhere deep down, that Tate might never love him the way Noah wanted to be loved. He had spent years hopping, waiting, and trying to understand something that perhaps was never meant to happen. And maybe that was okay. Sometimes love didn't have to be returned to be real. Sometimes a person could matter to you even if they could never give you what you needed. But knowing that didn't make the pain disappear. What destroyed him was the thought that everything they had built together, their strange, complicated, beautiful, impossible bond, was ending. The laughter, the arguments, the late nights, the comfort of knowing Tate was always there. 22 years of memories that had shaped who Noah was. Soon things would change. Tate would have a wife, a new life, a future where Noah no longer had the same place. And Noah couldn't escape the truth that the home they had created together was slipping away. He rested his hands against the cupboard door, his eyes burning with tears. For years he had convinced himself that no matter what happened, Tate would always come back. That no matter how far apart they drifted, there would always be something connecting them. But now, standing alone in the early morning darkness, Noah had to face the possibility that some bonds could be permanent in your heart while still ending in your life. And that truth was almost unbearable. Noah knew what followed: weddings, the quiet retreat, the closed door, the unspoken understanding of what came next. Tate would take Chloe back to their suite and they would have their wedding night, something intimate and expected, wrapped in tradition and approval. It wasn't just the closeness between them that unsettled Noah, it was everything surrounding it, the way it was recognized, even anticipated as a natural next step. That thought pressed in on him, heavier than he wanted to admit. It wasn't only about what Tate and Chloe would share behind that door, but the fact that no one questioned it, no one hesitated to celebrate it. Their relationship moved forward with certainty, with a kind of social permission Noah had never known. He told himself it shouldn't matter, that what happened between two people in private wasn't something to measure or compare. But it wasn't that simple. The wedding night symbolized something larger: belonging, legitimacy, a future that unfolded without resistance. And standing there on the outside of it, Noah felt a quiet kind of absence, like something essential had been written out of his life before he ever had the chance to claim it. Jealousy still didn't fully capture it. It was more like a steady ache, a reminder that even if he found someone, even if he allowed himself that possibility, it wouldn't be seen the same way. Not here, not in the world he was living in. So Noah drank. At first it was slow, intentional in the way grief sometimes convinces itself it needs ritual. A toast, quiet and uneven, to Joey, then another. And after that, the line between remembering and numbing stopped being something he could clearly separate. The goal shifted without him really deciding it, less about honoring anything, more about shutting everything off. Noah sat alone in the darkness of the Rambler, the bottle still untouched in his hand, when a memory came rushing back to him. A night years ago. An evening when everything had seemed simple. He remembered lying in bed with Tate, the two of them wrapped together in the quiet comfort they had created. There had been no outside world, no expectations, no questions they had to answer. Just the two of them. Tate had looked at him and said something Noah never forgot. He said he wanted to sleep beside Noah for the rest of his life. Not for a night. Not for a season, for his entire life. He wanted the same things they always did together: the closeness, the warmth, the way they could fall asleep without fear, the way Tate would hold on to him as if letting go meant losing something important. To anyone else, it might have looked ordinary. Two people sharing a bed. Two people comforting each other. But Noah knew it had always felt like something more. Tate had always treated those moments like they carried a meaning he refused to explain. He never gave Noah the words. He never defined what they were or why their connection felt different. It was always hidden behind silence, like a secret neither of them was brave enough to uncover. It was intimacy without a name. Invisible. There was nothing anyone could point to, nothing anyone could prove, but Noah felt it every time Tate held him. It wasn't something that could be displayed to the world. It was something only they understood. And maybe that was why losing it hurt so much. Because Chloe would receive everything society knew how to recognize. She would have the traditional ceremony, the title, the public acceptance, the role everyone understood. She would become the wife of a powerful man, his chosen partner, someone people would admire when she entered a room. Her place beside Tate would be celebrated. Her relationship would be acknowledged, protected, and respected. Noah knew the world would look at Chloe and immediately understand her importance. But what about him? What would Noah ever receive? If he stayed true to who he was, if he refused to change himself to fit what society wanted, he knew he would never receive that same kind of validation. He would never have the effortless approval that came from choosing the expected path. The world could understand a wife. It could understand a husband. But it struggled with a bond like his and Tate's, a relationship that lived somewhere between friendship, love, family, and something neither of them had ever been able to name. Noah looked around the Rambler, the house filled with memories of a life that was about to change. He had spent 22 years loving someone who might never be able to choose him. And the cruelest part was knowing that even if Tate had loved him in his own way, the world would never celebrate it the way it celebrated Chloe. Noah had spent years analyzing Tate, examining him, picking apart every word, every action, every hesitation, and even every moment when Tate chose not to act. He had searched for clues that might explain what they were. He had replayed conversations in his mind until the memories felt worn down from being examined so many times. He looked for hidden meanings in things Tate said, in the way he touched him, in the way he looked at him, in the way he always seemed to need Noah close. But the truth was, Noah could never find the answer. There was never any clear indication that Tate was anything beyond what he always claimed to be. There was never a confession. Never a moment where Tate admitted attraction to men. Never a sign that he saw Noah, or any other man, in a romantic way. If Tate had ever shown even the smallest hint that he found a man attractive, Noah knew he would have told him everything back in 1986. He would have taken the risk. He would have confessed his feelings and finally stopped living in uncertainty. But there had been nothing. Nothing except a bond that was impossible to explain. Noah thought about all the years they had spent together, all the movies they had watched at the cinema, all the nights they had sat on the couch, sharing snacks, laughing at television shows, existing together in a kind of comfortable silence that felt like home. Tate had never looked at men the way he looked at women. He had never become nervous around a man he found attractive, never acted flustered, never showed the kind of interest Noah had spent years hoping to see. Tate's attraction had always seemed to follow the path everyone expected of him, the traditional image of girlfriends, wives, and the kind of women society celebrated beside successful men. And that was what made everything so painful. Because Noah could not convince himself that Tate was secretly waiting to admit something. He couldn't create a fantasy just because he wanted it to be true. Tate's feelings for him might have been deep. They might have been intense. They might have been unlike anything either of them shared with anyone else. But deep did not always mean romantic. Intense did not always mean desire. Noah had to face the possibility that what he and Tate shared existed in a place that neither friendship nor romance could completely define. And the hardest part was remembering that Tate had often rejected the very thing Noah secretly hoped for. Tate had criticized and judged men who were attracted to men. He had treated that kind of attraction as something foreign, something separate from himself. Noah had heard those words. He had carried them with him. Because how could someone love him in a way they refused to even accept? Noah looked down at the bottle in his hand, feeling the weight of 22 years of confusion. Maybe the tragedy was not that Tate had hidden a love he was afraid to admit. Maybe the tragedy was that Noah had spent so many years searching for proof of something that was never there. Only twice in 22 years had Noah ever been kissed by Tate. The first time had been completely accidental. It happened during one of their proms. The gymnasium was alive with music, laughter, and flashing colored lights reflecting off the polished floor. Students danced in groups while others stood around talking, enjoying one of the last nights they would all spend together. Then Talks, It's My Life began playing. Tate's face lit up. "My song," he said with a grin. Without caring who was watching, he grabbed Noah by the hands and started spinning him around right there on the dance floor. The two of them laughed like children, twirling faster and faster until they drifted toward the edge of the gym near the hallway doors. They were laughing so hard that neither of them noticed Tate's dress shoe catch against the floor. His footing disappeared. Tate stumbled sideways, nearly twisting his ankle as he lurched toward the lockers lining the hallway just outside the gymnasium. Noah reacted instantly. He caught Tate around the waist before he could fall. The sudden movement threw Noah off balance too. For one suspended moment, neither of them was standing securely. Then their faces collided. Tate's lips landed against Noah's. The kiss lasted no more than a heartbeat. An accident. But to Noah, it felt as though electricity raced through every nerve in his body. His heart slammed against his ribs. Fireworks exploded behind his eyes as the music continued playing around them. Everything else disappeared. There was only Tate. Then Tate froze. His smile vanished. He looked startled, almost uncomfortable, and immediately pulled away, creating space between them. "You okay?" Noah asked quietly. "Yeah," Tate answered a little too quickly. He glanced at his ankle, flexed it once, then forced a small laugh, almost wiped out. Neither of them mentioned the kiss. They walked back onto the dance floor as though nothing had happened. To Tate, it had been an accident. To Noah, it became a memory he would carry for the rest of his life. The second kiss was one Noah never actually remembered. He had been asleep. The next day, Mark told him what had happened. Mark and Tate had been arguing, one of their loud, heated arguments that seemed to spiral from irritation into something much more personal. Noah had been asleep nearby, completely unaware of the confrontation unfolding around him. According to Mark, in the middle of the argument, Mark leaned over and kissed Noah. It wasn't about affection. It was about provoking Tate. Mark admitted that he had wanted to see how Tate would react. The reaction had been immediate. Tate's face darkened with anger. Without saying much, he grabbed Noah and kissed him hard. Passionately. Not out of romance. Not out of attraction. But to prove a point. Mark told Noah there had been no indication that Tate had enjoyed the kiss. It felt like he was making a statement, Mark explained, not sharing a kiss. That detail stayed with Noah. If Tate had truly been attracted to men, Noah thought, surely there would have been some sign. Some hesitation. Some desire. Some enjoyment. But according to the only witness, there had been none. It had looked less like a kiss born of attraction and more like an emotional reaction in the middle of an argument. Noah turned the story over in his mind countless times. It explained Tate's anger. It explained his possessiveness. But it still didn't explain his heart. After all those years, Noah was left with the same unanswered question he had always carried. Why did Tate react so fiercely whenever someone else crossed a line with Noah, yet never once admit that he wanted Noah for himself? Tate wasn't in the closet. He wasn't repressing anything. He wasn't secretly gay. He wasn't secretly bisexual. He was simply straight. It was the simplest explanation, and after years of analyzing every memory, every conversation, and every shared moment, Noah could no longer deny it. He had spent years trying to solve a mystery that probably never existed. Just because Tate wanted to sleep beside Noah didn't mean he was attracted to him. Just because Tate's boundaries with Noah were more intimate than those of most male friends didn't mean he desired him. Just because Tate slept on top of him, held him while they slept, or insisted they share the same bed didn't mean Tate found Noah physically attractive. Noah had searched every memory for hidden meaning. Every glance. Every touch. Every word. Every silence. In the end, there simply wasn't any evidence that Tate wanted him the way Noah wanted Tate. Noah felt like an idiot. A fool. He had spent years trying to turn ordinary facts into extraordinary evidence, hoping they would somehow prove the impossible. They never did. Noah didn't hate heterosexuality because he believed there was something wrong with it. He hated what it meant for him. It was the reason Tate could never return his feelings. It was the reason Tate looked at women the way Noah wished he would look at him. It was the reason Noah had spent 22 years loving someone who could never love him in the same way. And Noah didn't hate Chloe. He didn't blame her for falling in love with Tate or for accepting his proposal. If their positions had been reversed, he would have done the very same thing. What Noah hated was the position Chloe was about to have. In just a few hours, she would become Tate's wife. She would wake up beside him. She would build a home with him. She would share the ordinary moments Noah had secretly dreamed about for more than 2 decades. She would receive, without question, the place Noah had spent 22 years hoping he might someday have the chance to earn. Noah wasn't jealous of Chloe as a person. He was jealous of the life she was going to live. He envied the effortless certainty that came with being the woman Tate loved. He envied the future that was opening before her while his own was quietly closing. That was what hurt. Not that Chloe had won, but that Noah had never truly been a possibility. By 7 o'clock that morning, Noah had downed at least 20 whiskey shooters, desperately trying to drown out the thoughts he couldn't escape. The alcohol burned going down, but it never reached the place where the pain lived. He couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Tate standing at the altar. Saw Chloe walking toward him. Saw the life Noah had quietly imagined for 22 years disappearing forever. Normally, Noah enjoyed a good whiskey now and then. It reminded him of Uncle Joey. Joey had always appreciated a quality whiskey, teaching Noah to sip it slowly instead of rushing through it. Today was different. Today, Noah wasn't drinking for the taste. He was drinking to forget. He poured another shooter and rolled the small glass between his fingers, listening to the soft clink, clink, clink as the thick bass tapped against the wooden table. The sound echoed through the otherwise silent Rambler. He stared into the amber liquid before tossing it back in one swallow. Then the telephone rang. The shrill sound shattered the quiet. Noah frowned and reached for the landline. "Hello," he answered, his voice tired and rough. Silence. Then, breathing. Slow. Steady. Someone was there. Noah pulled the receiver away from his ear and glanced at the caller ID. It wasn't a California number. His stomach tightened. For a moment, he simply stared at the unfamiliar digits. Then an old fear crept into his mind. It had been years. Years since he'd had to think about him. But maybe, just maybe, the creep had come back. Noah slowly lifted the receiver back to his ear. "Who is this?" he asked, his voice firmer this time. The only answer was breathing. Noah didn't hang up. Something kept him listening. The silence wasn't empty anymore. He heard the unmistakable sound of liquid being poured into a glass. A moment later came the faint clink of ice. Whoever was on the other end was making a drink. Noah's grip tightened around the receiver. Then came several soft clicking noises, as though someone were pressing buttons on an old cassette recorder. A burst of static crackled through the line. Then an audio recording began to play. Noah froze. "Tate, I don't know how to drive," a younger voice said nervously. Noah's breath caught. It was his own voice. From years ago. "I'm the worst driver in the world." Laughter erupted in the background. Warm. Unrestrained. Unmistakably Tate. The sound hit Noah like a punch to the chest. It wasn't a recent recording. It sounded like a home movie, something captured on an old camcorder, complete with the muffled hiss of worn videotape. Then Tate's younger voice came through the receiver. "You just need to take your foot off the clutch, Noah." Another laugh. "Try not to run over any dogs." Noah felt his heart stop. He remembered that day. He had been 17. Tate had spent hours trying to teach him how to drive a stick shift, laughing every time Noah stalled the engine or panicked at the slightest bump in the road. Neither of them had known someone was recording them. Yet here it was. Their voices. Their laughter. A moment of their lives preserved on tape. being played back to him by an anonymous caller. Noah didn't say a word. He simply listened, his pulse hammering in his ears, wondering who could possibly have a recording like this, and why they had chosen today of all days to make him hear it again. The recording continued. "You are such a lead foot, Noe," young Tate laughed. "Stop mashing the controls." Noah could hear his younger self groan in embarrassment, followed by the sputtering engine stalling once again. "Oh, come on," Tate said, still laughing. There was the sound of a car door opening and shifting weight against the seat. "Move over." The recording crackled for a moment. "You can sit between my legs and I'll teach you how to drive." Noah heard himself mumble something too quietly for the microphone to pick up. "That's it," Tate encouraged, "nice and slow, easy with the clutch." The engine started again. This time it stayed running. Then another familiar voice broke in. "Joey, stop filming us," 17-year-old Tate called over his shoulder. "You're going to make Noe anxious." Uncle Joey only laughed harder from behind the camera. "Oh, I am absolutely keeping this." "You really are the worst driver," Joey teased between laughs. "Oh, shut up," Noah's younger voice answered, making both Joey and Tate burst into even louder laughter. The recording captured something Noah had forgotten. Not just the words. The happiness. The easy way they had all laughed together before life had become so complicated. Before heartbreak. Before weddings. Before goodbyes. Noah closed his eyes as the voices of his 17-year-old self, Tate, and Joey filled the quiet rambler. For a few precious moments, they were all together again. Then he remembered the anonymous caller was still on the other end of the line. Listening with him. The recording suddenly stopped. A mechanical whirling sound filled the telephone line. Noah immediately recognized it. Someone was fast-forwarding an old cassette tape. The tape spun rapidly, followed by a series of loud clack, clack, clack noises before the machine settled. Another click. Then the recording began again. At first there was only muffled wrestling and laughter. Fabric shifting. A mattress creaking. Then a familiar young voice spoke. "Took you long enough," 17-year-old Noah teased through the speakers. A younger Tate laughed softly. "Sorry, my father wanted to talk to me about something." There was a brief pause. "I didn't wake you up, did I?" "No," young Noah answered sleepily, "you didn't wake me up. I can't fall asleep without you." The words struck the older Noah like a blow to the chest. His fingers tightened around the receiver until his knuckles turned white. He could hear the mattress shifting again. More laughter. Then Tate's younger voice came closer to the audio recorder. The recording captured the unmistakable sound of someone being pulled across the bed. Older Noah could almost picture it. Tate had grabbed him by the waist and pulled the 17-year-old onto his lap. "The prince of the house is cold," Tate said playfully, "Warm me up, little toaster." Noah heard his younger self dissolve into laughter. "Is that all I am?" young Noah asked between giggles. "A bed warmer." Tate laughed. "Of course you're just a bed warmer." A beat of silence. Then Tate added with exaggerated aristocratic confidence. "All rich boys kiss their bed warmers, don't you know that?" The recording erupted into loud, theatrical kissing noises. "Moi, moi, moi." No, younger Noah burst into helpless laughter. "Tate." Another exaggerated kiss. "No, stop." More laughter. "You are such an idiot." Tate only laughed harder, continuing the playful barrage. There, the bed warmer has been properly appreciated. Older Noah felt tears sting his eyes. He had forgotten this. Forgotten the sound of their laughter. Forgotten how effortlessly happy they had once been. He smiled despite himself, only for the smile to fade almost as quickly as it appeared. Those moments had felt ordinary when they happened. Now they were priceless. He swallowed hard as another tear rolled down his cheek. In a few hours, Tate would be standing at an altar, promising the rest of his life to someone else. Yet here, preserved on an old cassette tape, was a version of Tate who couldn't fall asleep without Noah, who pulled him close to stay warm, and who made him laugh until his stomach hurt. Noah pressed the receiver tighter against his ear, desperate not to miss another second. Whoever was playing the tape had somehow given him something he thought he had lost forever. The sound of the life he and Tate used to have. The tape continued to play. There was the soft rustle of blankets, the quiet creak of a mattress. Older Noah closed his eyes. He knew this sound. He knew this night. On the recording, his younger self shifted closer, nuzzling against Tate. Noah could hear himself resting his head against Tate's bare chest as the room fell into a comfortable silence. Tate, young Noah asked softly. Tate murmured. Do you love me? There was silence. The mattress shifted. Then the cassette crackled with a burst of static. Go to sleep, Noah, Tate said at last, his voice carrying a note of frustration. I'm serious, Noah pleaded. Another pause. Please. Older Noah heard the faint sound of his younger self sniffling. Tate let out a long, weary sigh. Rich boys don't love poor boys, Noah, he said quietly. Everyone knows that. Another pause. Go to sleep. The words landed like stones in the older Noah's chest. He remembered how much they had hurt. The tape suddenly whirred. Someone on the other end of the telephone had pressed the fast-forward button. The recording sped ahead with a mechanical whine before stopping with a loud clack. Another click. The tape resumed. This time there was only silence. Slow, steady breathing. Young Noah was asleep. Older Noah listened intently. Then Tate's younger voice broke the silence. You always ask too many questions, 17-year-old Tate whispered. From the faint sounds on the tape, Noah could tell Tate was absent-mindedly stroking his hair. The slow movement was almost audible against the pillow. One day you're going to ask me a question I can't answer. His voice was barely above a whisper. Older Noah felt his throat tighten. He had never heard this part. He hadn't been awake. The tape captured the soft sound of fabric moving. Then what sounded like a gentle kiss against Noah's cheek. There was a long silence afterward. When Tate finally spoke again, his voice sounded strained. I can't love you, Noe. He swallowed audibly. I promised him I would never love you that way. The room fell silent once more. Older Noah stopped breathing. His heart pounded so hard he could hear it in his ears. He stared at the wall, unable to move, the receiver trembling in his hand. For 22 years he had searched for answers. Now, on the morning of Tate's wedding, an old cassette tape had given him a sentence that changed everything. Not an explanation. Just another mystery. The tape continued. Older Noah could hear nothing but the slow, peaceful breathing of his 17-year-old self. He had been asleep. Completely unaware. Tate must have said those words while Noah was slumbering beside him. I can't love you, Noe. A shaky breath. I promised him I would never love you that way. Older Noah's eyes widened. His grip tightened around the telephone receiver until his fingers ached. His mind raced. Promised who? The tape answered nothing. It only deepened the mystery. The recording continued. For several seconds there was only silence, broken by Noah's steady breathing and the occasional rustle of blankets. Then, a faint squeak. An old bedroom door is slowly opening. Tate's breathing caught. The tape did not end. Older Noah remained perfectly still, barely daring to breathe. He heard soft footsteps crossing the carpet. Slow. Measured. Whoever had entered the room hadn't left immediately. There was the faint flutter of clothing, as though someone had shifted their weight or knelt beside the bed. Then, silence. A gentle scratching sound broke through the speakers. Older Noah frowned. It took him a moment to recognize it. Someone was absent-mindedly scratching through Tate's hair. The sound was unmistakable, the soft brushing of fingers moving through thick hair. Noah's stomach tightened. Who was touching Tate? Why hadn't Tate told them to stop? His heartbeat quickened as he strained to hear every tiny sound coming through the receiver. The room on the tape remained quiet except for the rhythmic breathing of his younger self, still asleep beside Tate. Then Tate spoke. Noah's sleeping, he said quietly. The softness in his voice contrasted sharply with the anger from only moments before. Older Noah swallowed hard. He could almost see the room in his mind, the darkness, the bed they shared, himself asleep and completely unaware that another person had entered. A strange mixture of curiosity and dread settled over him. Every second of the recording felt like another missing piece of a puzzle he hadn't even known existed. His fingers trembled around the receiver. Whoever had preserved these recordings knew things Noah had never witnessed. Things that had happened while he slept. Things Tate had apparently made sure Noah would never hear. And now, on the morning of Tate's wedding, every hidden moment was being played back for him, one tape at a time. The change was immediate. Whatever softness had been in his voice disappeared. "Get the fuck out," 17-year-old Tate snapped. The command was sharp, low, and filled with anger. There was no reply on the recording. Only the slow squeak of the bedroom door closing again. Silence returned. Older Noah felt a chill spread through his body. His heart hammered against his ribs. Someone had been standing in the doorway. Someone had heard or almost heard what Tate had whispered. Who had walked in? Who had Tate been protecting Noah from? Or who had Tate been hiding Noah from? Noah's pulse pounded in his ears. He searched his memory desperately, trying to remember that night. Nothing. He had slept through it. He had never known anyone had opened the bedroom door. He had never known Tate had ordered someone to leave. His mouth had gone dry. Every answer the tape offered seemed to create two more questions. For 22 years, Noah had believed there were no secrets left between them. Now, with every second of the old cassette, he realized there had been entire conversations he had never known existed. And whoever was playing this recording wanted him to hear every one of them. The recording continued. Older Noah could hear nothing but his own younger self breathing peacefully in his sleep. He had been completely unaware of everything happening around him. There was the faint sound of bedsheets rustling. Tate leaned closer. Older Noah could hear the mattress shift beneath their weight, followed by the quiet sound of Tate's breathing near the audio recorder. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, Tate spoke into Noah's ear. "Keep sleeping, Noah." There was a long pause. "Don't ever wake up." The words drained the color from older Noah's face. His breath caught in his throat. "What?" The receiver trembled in his hand. He replayed the sentence over and over in his mind. "Keep sleeping, Noah. Don't ever wake up." His stomach twisted. It didn't sound like a joke. It didn't sound angry. It sounded exhausted. Heartbroken. Like someone confessing something they hoped would never be heard. Noah could hear his younger self continue breathing peacefully, completely unaware that Tate had whispered those words into the darkness. The tape continued. For several seconds, there was only the sound of the room. The quiet breathing of Noah is asleep. The faint rustle of blankets. The recording continued. Older Noah sat motionless, the telephone receiver pressed tightly against his ear. The sounds from the tape changed. The tension from before faded away. There was only the quiet creaking of the bed moving gently back and forth. A soft rhythm. Slow. Comforting. Noah listened carefully. Then he heard it. Tate was singing. Not loudly. Not for anyone else. Just softly, almost under his breath. A lullaby. The sound was so unexpected that Noah's chest tightened. He could hear the movement of the bed, the gentle rocking motion as Tate kept Noah warm, holding him close like he had done so many times before. The teenage version of Tate, the boy Noah remembered as confident, arrogant, and impossible to read, sounded completely different. His voice was quiet. Tender. Full of something Noah had spent years searching for. Love. Older Noah closed his eyes. He listened to the way Tate sang, the way his voice softened around each word. There was no performance. No audience. No reason to pretend. Tate didn't know anyone was listening. He didn't know anyone would ever hear this recording. This was simply Tate in a moment when he believed he was alone with Noah. And that was what hurt the most. Because Noah had spent 22 years wondering if any of it had been real. The closeness. The tenderness. The way Tate held on to him. The way Tate always seemed to need him nearby. The recording didn't prove what Noah had once hoped it would. It didn't prove that Tate had secretly been in love with him. But it proved something else. That teenage Tate had cared deeply. That Noah mattered. That in the quietest moments when nobody was watching, Tate had been gentle with him. Noah felt tears slide down his face. He lowered his eyes to the whiskey glass sitting on the table. All this time, he had been trying to decide whether Tate's love was real or not. Maybe the painful truth was that it had always been real. It just had never been the kind of love Noah had needed it to be. The lullaby continued playing through the phone line. And for the first time that morning, Noah didn't hear it as proof of what he had lost. He heard it as proof that, for a little while, he had been loved in the only way Tate knew how to give. The recording continued. The room was quiet except for the soft breathing of a sleeping Noah. Older Noah listened carefully, his hand tightening around the receiver. Then Tate's voice came through. Young. Quiet. Almost afraid that the words might disappear if he said them too loudly. I'll never leave you, Noe. A pause. I'll never leave you alone. The bed shifted softly. Noah could hear that Tate was still awake, still holding him close while he slept. Not for money. A breath. Not for position. Another pause. Not for anything. The certainty in Tate's voice made Noah's chest ache. There was no audience. No one to impress. No one to convince. Just Tate speaking into the darkness while Noah slept. Then Tate whispered, I only want my heart to touch yours. Older Noah closed his eyes. The words stayed suspended in the silence between the past and the present. For years, Noah had wondered if he had imagined the depth of what they shared. But the recording proved something he had always known deep down. Tate cared. He cared in ways he didn't know how to explain. In ways he didn't know how to admit. And somehow, that realization hurt more than if the recording had revealed nothing at all. Because the hardest truth was not that Tate had felt nothing. The hardest truth was that Tate had felt something profound. And still could not give Noah the future he had spent 22 years hoping for. The recording continued. For a moment there was only the quiet sound of the room. Then Tate spoke again. His voice was barely above a whisper. I promised. Older Noah felt his chest tighten. Young Tate sounded like he was making a vow to the darkness itself. Whatever happens, whatever comes. A pause. I'll take it again. The words carried a strange mixture of determination and fear. Even if it kills me this time. Noah sat frozen, listening to a version of Tate he had never been allowed to see. Not the confident Tate who always seemed to have control. Not the Tate who could charm a room full of people. This was someone softer. Someone afraid. Someone holding onto something he couldn't explain. Then Tate whispered, the things we have here, Noe. His voice became quieter. I don't ever want to stop. Older Noah closed his eyes. Because he understood what Tate meant. The late-night conversations. The laughter. The comfort of knowing someone would always be there. The small routines had become their own private world. The things that seemed ordinary when they were happening, but became impossible to replace once they were gone. A tear slipped down Noah's cheek. The recording wasn't giving him the answer he had spent years searching for. It wasn't a simple confession. It wasn't proof that Tate had been the person Noah wanted him to be. It was something more complicated. It was proof that, at some point, Tate had been terrified of losing him. And now, sitting alone in the Rambler on the morning of Tate's wedding, Noah had to listen to the voice of a boy who promised he would never let go. While knowing the man Tate became was about to walk away. The recording continued. Older Noah listened as Tate's voice came through the static again. The words were quiet, almost like Tate was afraid the darkness itself might hear him. I don't ever want to get married. Noah froze. He knew those words belonged to a 17-year-old boy who couldn't see the future. A boy who didn't know that one day he would be standing at an altar. Tate continued. The things we don't do here, Noe. A pause. The way we're close, it matters more than anything. Older Noah felt his throat tighten. Because Tate wasn't talking about appearances. He wasn't talking about what other people saw. He was talking about the invisible things. The trust. The comfort. The understanding between two people who had spent years knowing each other better than anyone else. The little moments nobody else would notice. The feeling of being completely accepted. Then Tate whispered, wherever Noe is. A long pause. That's where Tate wants to be. Noah closed his eyes. The words hurt because they sounded so simple. So certain. For years, Noah had wondered if their connection had only existed in his imagination. But the recording proved that it had mattered to Tate too. Maybe not in the exact way Noah had wanted. Maybe not in the way that would lead to the life Noah dreamed about. But it mattered. The 17-year-old voice on the tape belonged to someone who believed Noah was his safe place. His home. And that was the tragedy Noah had to carry. Because sometimes the person who feels most like home is still someone life asks you to lose. The recording continued. For a moment there was nothing but static. The old audio crackled through the phone line, making Tate's voice sound far away. Then he spoke. "You don't understand." Older Noah felt his grip tighten around the receiver. There was something in Tate's voice that he had never heard before. Not anger. Not arrogance. Fear. "They'll try to rip us apart." The recording hissed. A few seconds passed before Tate spoke again. "When I'm old enough, people will expect me to get married." His voice became quieter. "Or they'll arrange a marriage." Noah sat frozen. The words carried a weight he hadn't expected. Because this wasn't the Tate who always seemed untouchable. This was a 17-year-old boy who sounded terrified that the future would take something away from him. "I never want to get married." The sentence came out almost like a plea. Then there was silence. And Noah heard it. Tate was crying. Not the kind of crying meant to be heard. It was quiet. Restrained. The sound of someone trying to hold everything inside. Older Noah closed his eyes as the emotion washed over him. He had spent years remembering Tate as someone who never needed anyone. Someone who always had control. Someone who could walk away without looking back. But the recording revealed a different version. A boy who was afraid. A boy who knew the world expected things from him. A boy who, in that moment, sounded like he was grieving a future he hadn't even lost yet. Noah listened to the faint sound of Tate trying to compose himself. And for the first time in years, he wondered if the distance between them had never been as simple as he thought. Maybe Tate hadn't just walked away. Maybe in some ways Tate had been pushed away too. The audio recording ended. The last sound of teenage Tate's voice faded away, leaving only the faint hiss of the telephone line. Older Noah sat there frozen. He expected the call to end. He expected silence. But whoever was on the other end of the telephone hadn't hung up. The line remained open. Noah slowly lowered the receiver from his ear, confused. "Hello?" "Nothing." He swallowed and brought the phone closer. "Who is this?" For several seconds there was no answer. Only the quiet emptiness of the connection. Noah's heart began to beat faster. The recordings had been real. Every word. Every hidden moment. Someone had wanted him to hear them. But who? And why? Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the connection ended. A sharp metallic sound echoed through the receiver. Clank. The line went dead. Noah slowly lowered the phone. He stared at it, unable to move. The silence inside the Rambler felt heavier than before. He had spent years wondering what Tate felt. What Tate remembered. What Tate had kept hidden. Now, on the morning of Tate's wedding, someone had handed him pieces of a past he thought was lost forever. And then they disappeared before he could ask a single question. Noah sat there for a long time, staring at the dead telephone. Maybe it had been one of his friends. Maybe someone who knew what today meant. The day Tate was getting married. The day Noah had been dreading for a week. A part of him wanted to believe that someone had noticed how much pain he was in and had tried to give him something to hold onto. Maybe one of them had found old recordings. Maybe they thought hearing Tate's voice from the past would comfort him. But the more Noah thought about it, the less it made sense. Why would his friends do that? Why would they choose today? Why would they play recordings of moments Noah never knew existed? His friends knew he loved Tate. They knew the history between them. They knew that watching Tate marry someone else was painful. But this wasn't comfort. Comfort would have been a phone call. A simple "Are you okay?" A reminder that he wasn't alone. This was something else. Whoever had called him hadn't just tried to make him feel better. They had opened a door Noah had spent years trying to keep closed. They had shown him moments from the past that changed the way he understood everything. Noah looked at the telephone. His reflection stared back faintly from the dark plastic. "No," he whispered. His friends wouldn't have done this. They wouldn't have known about those private moments. They wouldn't have had access to recordings made decades ago. And they wouldn't have disappeared without saying a word. A cold realization settled over him. Whoever had called wasn't trying to comfort him. They were trying to tell him something. The only question was, why now? Why on the morning Tate was supposed to marry Chloe? Noah stared at the silent telephone for several more seconds before finally setting it down. The questions were still there. The recordings. The silence on the other end. The memories he had never known existed. Everything felt too heavy to carry. He reached for the whiskey again. One shot became another. Then another. The burn was familiar. It was easier than thinking. Easier than remembering that in just a few hours, Tate would be standing in front of everyone, promising his future to someone else. Noah eventually pushed himself up from the table, his movements slower now. His eyes drifted across the room until they landed on a framed photograph sitting nearby. Uncle Joey. The gold frame caught the dim morning light. Noah picked it up carefully. For a moment he just stared at the picture. Joey's smile looked the same as it always had. Warm. Confident. Like someone who knew exactly what to say when the world became too complicated. "You would know what to do," Noah whispered. His voice cracked. Joey had always been the person who saw more than anyone else. The person who noticed things Noah didn't say out loud. Noah held the frame against his chest as he walked back toward the couch. The whiskey had started catching up with him. The room felt softer around the edges. The sounds of the morning seemed far away. Noah's thoughts drifted. Maybe it was that annoying stalker. The one who had been calling Tate's phone years ago. Definitely not Noah. The phrase crossed his mind bitterly. A person who had somehow known exactly where to hurt him. Someone who wasn't trying to help. Someone who wanted to torment him by reminding him of everything Noah and Tate used to be. How close they were. How much time did they spend together? How many memories did they share that nobody else understood? What kind of monster would do that, Noah wondered. Who would go out of their way to drag those moments back into the present? Who would make him listen to recordings of a past he had spent years trying to understand? But then another thought stopped him. How did they get the tapes? That was the part that didn't make sense. Talia kept those tapes in the attic. They weren't something a stranger could simply find. They weren't sitting somewhere accessible. Someone couldn't just walk into the house, search through years of memories, and magically know which recordings mattered. Noah frowned. The person behind the calls had to know they existed. They had to know where they were kept. They had to know enough about Tate and Noah to understand exactly what those recordings would do to him. A stranger wouldn't have that kind of knowledge. Which left Noah with a question he couldn't answer. Who had been close enough to find the tapes? And why did they want him to hear them now? He sat down heavily, still holding Joey's photograph in his hands. His eyelids grew heavier. For the first time all night, his mind began to quiet. Not because the pain was gone. Not because the questions had been answered. But because exhaustion had finally won. Noah rested the gold-framed photograph against him as he sank deeper into the couch. The last thing he thought before sleep took over was how strange it was that after all these years, he was still looking for answers from the people who had already left him. By the time the dawn blurred into something heavier and less structured, Noah wasn't counting anymore. He wasn't thinking in numbers or decisions, just in the dull fatting of edges, thoughts, tension, memory, everything getting quieter in exchange for control slipping away, and then there was nothing. When he woke up, it was still June 12th. The light in the room was wrong at first, too bright, too sharp, and it took him a few seconds to understand why his body felt like it had been left somewhere it didn't belong. His head throbbed immediately, a heavy pounding behind his eyes that made even opening them feel like an effort. His mouth was dry, his throat worse, and there was a strange, distant heaviness in his limbs that didn't match waking up so much as recovering from something he couldn't fully remember. Noah slowly opened his eyes. For a moment he didn't know where he was. The morning light filtered through the windows of the Rambler, and his head throbbed from the whiskey. Then he remembered. The phone call. The recordings. Everything he had heard. Noah shifted on the couch, expecting to feel the familiar weight of the gold-framed photograph he had fallen asleep holding. But it wasn't there. He looked down. Empty. His heart skipped. The frame was gone. Noah sat up quickly, suddenly more awake. He checked beside him. Nothing. He looked behind the couch. Nothing. He reached underneath, feeling around in the dust and shadows. Still nothing. His brow furrowed. That didn't make sense. Frames didn't just disappear in the middle of the night. He remembered holding it. He remembered falling asleep with it in his hands. So where was it? No, Noah whispered. He stood up and searched the living room again, moving pillows and checking the floor. Nothing. Then he noticed something else. A strange smell lingered in the room. Not the familiar scent of the Rambler. Not old wood. Not whiskey. Not anything he recognized. It was unfamiliar. Something he had never smelled before. Noah stopped moving. A chill ran through him. His mind immediately began searching for explanations. Had he gotten up while he was half asleep? Had he sleepwalked? Had he moved the frame somewhere and forgotten? The whiskey could explain a lot. Maybe he had been wandering around in his dreams, doing something he couldn't remember. But the feeling in his stomach told him something was wrong. Because Noah remembered one thing clearly. He had fallen asleep holding that frame. And now it was gone. The quiet of the Rambler suddenly felt different. Like the house was keeping a secret. Noah sat there, still trying to make sense of the missing frame. Then another strange detail surfaced. The taste in his mouth. He swallowed. His tongue felt like it carried the lingering flavor of something unfamiliar. A Manhattan. A cocktail. Noah frowned. That made no sense. He hadn't had a Manhattan. In fact, he had never had one in his life. He knew what whiskey tasted like. He knew the familiar burn of the drinks he occasionally allowed himself. But this was different. Sweet. Sharp. A taste he couldn't explain. Noah ran his tongue over his lips, confused. Where had it come from? He hadn't brought anyone home. He hadn't gone to a bar. He hadn't even left the Rambler. The last time he had been anywhere near a bar had been over a week ago. So how was it possible that he woke up with the taste of a drink he had never ordered? His mind started searching for a reasonable explanation. Maybe he had made one while half asleep. Maybe he had gotten up during the night and prepared something without remembering. The whiskey had been enough to blur his memory. But then another thought bothered him. Why would he make a Manhattan? He didn't drink them. He didn't keep the ingredients around. It wasn't something he would randomly choose. Noah looked around the quiet room. Everything about the morning felt wrong. The mysterious recordings. The missing frame. The unfamiliar scent. Now this. He thought about Tate. Tate had always had strange ways of coping with overwhelming emotions, retreating into himself, shutting down, disappearing into his own thoughts. But Noah knew himself. He knew his own habits. And this wasn't one of them. Noah touched his lips again, unsettled. How could he taste something he had never drunk? And why did it feel like the answer was connected to everything else that had happened during the night? Noah stood there, still trying to convince himself that there had to be a simple explanation. Maybe he had made the drink while half asleep. Maybe the whiskey had affected his memory. Maybe there was something he was forgetting. Then he stopped. He thought about what actually went into a Manhattan. Whiskey. Sweet vermouth. Bitters. Usually a cherry or some kind of garnish. Noah looked around the Rambler. No. He didn't have those things. He didn't have sweet vermouth. He didn't have bitters. He didn't have cherries. He didn't even remember having anything besides whiskey in the house. His stomach tightened. He couldn't make a Manhattan if he didn't have the ingredients. The explanation he had been trying to hold onto started falling apart. Noah looked toward the kitchen. Everything appeared normal. Too normal. And that somehow made it worse. Because now there were too many things he couldn't explain. The recordings. The missing frame. The unfamiliar scent. And now the taste of a drink he had never made. He touched his lips again, confused. "I didn't drink that," he whispered. The words sounded strange in the empty room. Noah had spent the entire night questioning the past. Now he was questioning the night itself. And he couldn't shake the feeling that something had happened in the Rambler while he was asleep. Noah's unease grew. Something still felt wrong. He rubbed his tongue against his teeth, trying to get rid of the strange taste lingering in his mouth. Then he noticed something. His mouth felt different. A strange texture. Something was stuck behind one of his teeth. Noah frowned and reached into his mouth. His fingers pulled out a small piece of gum. Partially chewed. He stared at it. For several seconds he couldn't understand what he was looking at. He hadn't chewed gum. Not last night. Not that morning. Not recently. And it wasn't even a flavor he liked. It wasn't the kind he bought. It wasn't something he kept in the house. Noah looked at the piece of gum in his hand, confused. Where did this come from? The question came out quietly. The more he thought about it, the more unsettled he became. He had woken up with the taste of a Manhattan he hadn't made. The photograph frame he had been holding was gone. There was a strange scent in the room. And now there was gum in his mouth that he had no memory of chewing. Then he noticed something else. His lips felt sore. Swollen. Noah immediately walked toward the mirror. The reflection staring back at him made his stomach drop. His lips looked irritated, almost like they had been pressed against something for a long time. Like he had been kissed. Like something had happened while he was asleep. Noah stepped closer to the mirror, searching his own face for answers. But there was nothing. No explanation. No memory. Just a growing feeling that the night had not gone the way he thought it had. He touched his lips carefully. His mind raced. Had he gotten up while sleepwalking? Had someone been inside the Rambler? Or was there something else happening that he couldn't remember? For the first time that morning, Noah stopped thinking about the past. He started wondering about what had happened to him while he was unconscious. Noah stood in front of the mirror, still trying to understand what he was seeing. Then another thought struck him. His clothes. Slowly, he lifted the collar of his t-shirt and brought it closer to his nose. Immediately, his expression changed. The smell was wrong. His shirt didn't smell like the Rambler. It didn't smell like his laundry detergent. It smelled like alcohol. Strong alcohol. Like he had been standing in the middle of a brewery or had somehow spilled drinks all over himself. Noah pulled the fabric away, disturbed. The scent was overwhelming. What happened? He looked down at his pants next. The same smell lingered there. It was as if he had been around alcohol for hours, yet he couldn't remember leaving the house or being anywhere near a bar. Then he noticed something else. A second scent. Cologne. Not his. Noah froze. He knew his own cologne. He knew the familiar scents in his home. This was different. A fragrance he had never smelled before. It clung to the fabric of his shirt, mixing with the smell of alcohol. Noah stepped back. His mind raced through every possibility. The missing frame. The unfamiliar taste. The gum he never chewed. The soreness in his lips. Now the smell of another person's cologne on his clothes. Every explanation he tried to create seemed to collapse. He looked around the quiet living room. For the first time, Noah wondered if he had been alone in the Rambler during the night. Or if someone else had been there. Someone he couldn't remember. Someone who had left behind traces he couldn't explain. Noah stood completely still. His thoughts started racing faster than he could control. One thing he knew with absolute certainty. He had driven home from the blue warehouse. He remembered leaving. He remembered the road. He remembered walking through the front door of the Rambler. He had not gone to a bar. He had not stopped anywhere. He had not picked up some stranger. He had not invited anyone inside. He had driven straight home. Alone. Stone cold sober. So how was this possible? Noah looked around the room. The silence that had once felt comforting now felt threatening. The missing frame. The recordings. The unfamiliar smell. The taste of a drink he hadn't made. The gum he didn't chew. The scent of another person's cologne on his clothes. None of it belonged. None of it made sense. His breathing became shallow. Who the fuck was in my house? The question echoed through the empty Rambler. A horrible possibility entered his mind. What if the person who had called him hadn't just been watching from a distance? What if they had been here? What if they were still here? Noah's eyes moved toward the hallway. Every shadow suddenly looked different. Every quiet sound felt suspicious. The thought that someone had entered his home without him knowing made fear crawl through him. And then came the worst part. The realization that someone might have been close to him while he was asleep. Someone had left behind evidence that they had been there. Noah's hands began to shake. He didn't know who it was. He didn't know what they wanted. He didn't know how long they had been inside the Rambler. But he knew one thing. He had gone to sleep alone. And he had woken up with proof that something had happened while he couldn't remember. For the first time in years, Noah wasn't afraid of losing Tate. He was afraid of whoever had found a way into his life without permission. Noah moved through the Rambler like a man searching for proof that he was losing his mind. Every room, every closet, every corner. He checked everywhere. Hello. His voice sounded small against the silence. Nothing answered. The house was empty. No footsteps. No voices. No movement. He checked the doors. Locked. The windows. Secure. Everything was exactly how it should have been. That somehow made it worse. Because if nobody had gotten inside, then how had all of this happened? Noah slowly walked back toward the dining room, his thoughts spinning. Then he stopped. Something was sitting on the table. Something that had not been there before. His entire body went cold. A gun. A loaded cocked gun. Just sitting there. Waiting. Noah stared at it, unable to understand what he was seeing. Why? Why would someone break into his house and leave that behind? What message was someone trying to send? His hands trembled as he moved closer, his fear overwhelming his confusion. This wasn't a forgotten object. This wasn't something that belonged there. It was another impossible thing added to a night that already felt impossible. Noah backed away, his breathing becoming uneven. He didn't know who had been inside. He didn't know what they wanted. But he knew he couldn't handle this alone. His eyes moved toward the telephone. Andrew. He needed to call Andrew. Someone who would help him think clearly. Someone who would believe him. Noah reached for the phone, his hand still shaking. Before he could pick it up, he looked back at the dining room table. The gun was still there. A silent reminder that whatever had happened during the night wasn't finished yet. His brain felt slow, fractured. It was trying to reassemble itself in real time. That's when his phone rang. The sound startled him more than it should have. Noah glanced down automatically, expecting a name he didn't care about, or worse, one he did. Unknown number, but not unknown anymore. His thumb hesitated for half a second before he answered. Hello. There was a brief pause on the other end, just enough to make his attention sharpen. Then a voice, warm and familiar in a way that didn't belong to this day. Hey, it's Riley. Something in Noah's chest shifted immediately, subtle but undeniable. Riley Shore, the 25-year-old guy he met on the Mexico cruise 5 days ago. Noah leaned back slightly in his seat without meaning to, the memory coming in clearer than expected. The ship, the music, the night air over the deck, Riley dancing like he belonged to the rhythm of everything around him instead of just passing through it. Noah walked up to him without thinking too much about it, talking, laughing, staying. The rest of the vacation unfolded around them like it had been waiting for that connection to exist. Mark nearby, watching with that quiet, approving smile, like he'd been relieved to see Noah pulled into something light instead of whatever heavier thing he usually carried. And Riley, he hadn't pushed, not once, not in the way people sometimes did when they assumed access. The first day or two had felt easy, casual, like most things on a cruise do when reality is still somewhere far away. But it had changed, not into something physical, not like that. Riley hadn't slept with him. He hadn't treated it like an opportunity to fill time or space or loneliness. He'd stayed, and then stayed differently, like he had noticed Noah enough to slow down instead of speed up. Noah cleared his throat slightly, adjusting his grip on the phone. "Hey," he said, and it came out steadier than he expected. "I wasn't sure I'd hear from you after we got back." A soft laugh on the other end. "Yeah, I wasn't sure either," Riley admitted. "Work's been kind of chaotic, PR stuff never really stops, you know." Noah nodded even though Riley couldn't see it. Entertainment and PR, Los Angeles, the same city Mark was in, the same city Noah lived in. That detail landed late like his brain needed a second to catch up to it. Riley continued casually enough, "I was actually thinking about you though. Figured I'd take a chance and see if this number still worked." Noah looked down at the phone again like it might explain something it wasn't ready to explain yet. Still worked. It wasn't a big phrase, but it felt strangely significant anyway. Like something that assumed continuity, like something that expected him to still be the same person who had walked up to him on a cruise deck and stayed. His heart gave a small, unsteady skip, a flicker of hope and apprehension before he could stop it. Los Angeles? Riley was in Los Angeles, so was Mark, so was he. The coincidence should have felt small, it didn't. Noah swallowed once, glancing out at his quiet driveway, the house waiting beyond it like nothing had changed in the world while everything in him had shifted slightly off-center. "Yeah," he said finally, quieter now, "it still works." A pause. Then Riley, lighter again, almost careful, "Good. I was hoping that was the case. Want to have dinner at 3 this afternoon at a bistro in Beverly Hills." Noah exhaled slowly through his nose, the sound barely there. And for the first time that morning, something in him moved that wasn't tied to Tate or weddings or absence, something uncertain, but alive. Noah grinned and nodded. "That would be lovely, Riley." "All right, hot stuff, meet me there and we'll see where this goes." Noah ended the call, still sitting in the driver's seat, phone warm in his hand, the silence afterward feeling different from it had before. Not empty, just interrupted, like something had stepped into it and left its shape behind. Riley's voice lingered longer than it should have. So did the fact that there was a date, today, in a few hours. It sat in Noah's mind in a way that felt almost unreal when placed next to everything else the day was supposed to contain. Tate is getting married, people gathering in neat rows of expectation. A life being formally committed to someone else while old histories got quietly boxed up and stored away. And Noah, going on a first date, it should have felt like a contrast, like balance. Instead, it felt like a collision. Riley was still the clearest part of it. The cruise came back in fragments, bright, warm, slightly detached from real life in the way vacations always are, music drifting across open decks, conversations that didn't feel rushed. Riley was moving through all of it with an ease that didn't seem performative. He had been dancing that night, not for attention, not in that self-conscious way people sometimes do when they know they're being watched, but like the music actually belonged to him. Noah remembered not thinking much before walking up to him. That part was important. It hadn't been calculated. It hadn't been something Noah had rehearsed or debated. He had just gone. And Riley had turned toward him like it was the most natural thing in the world. After that, everything had unfolded without effort. Talking that didn't stall, pauses that didn't feel like gaps, laughter that didn't require explanation. It hadn't been intense in the way people sometimes expect attraction to be. It had been steady, present, unforced. Mark had noticed immediately. Of course he had. By the second night, Mark had been half laughing at the sight of it, watching from a nearby lounge chair as Riley talked to Noah like the rest of the ship didn't exist. At one point, Mark had literally choked on his drink, not because anything inappropriate had happened, but because Riley had zero interest in subtlety. No coy hesitation. No careful packing, just open, direct attention that made it impossible to misunderstand what was happening. "He's not even trying to play it cool," Mark had said later, still amused, wiping his mouth. "That guy is fully locked in." And he had been right. Riley didn't do distance in the way people sometimes did when they were unsure. He didn't leave space for Noah to wonder where he stood or what something meant or whether interest needed to be guessed at instead of stated. When he focused on Noah, it was complete, undistracted, almost disarming in how clearly it was offered. Riley was smitten within an hour of meeting Noe. He liked Noah, not vaguely, not cautiously, clearly, loudly, and now that same clarity was on the phone, echoing in Noah's memory. Noah let his head rest briefly against the seat, eyes flicking toward the house beyond the windshield. Everything there was still waiting for him to decide what kind of day this was going to be. There was something about Riley that didn't require decoding. That was new. Most people, most situations came layered in ambiguity, mixed signals, emotional static. Noah was used to having to interpret, to translate, to fill in gaps that other people left open without realizing it. Riley didn't leave gaps, he filled them. There were no mixed signals from Riley, no misunderstandings or unanswered questions. Riley left no doubt he wanted Noah, and the blonde was overwhelmed at Riley's intensity. Not aggressively, not in a way that felt overwhelming in a threatening sense, but consistently. Riley listened like he was genuinely interested in the answer, not just waiting for his turn to speak. When Noah talked, Riley stayed with him, not drifting, not multitasking, not half-present, fully there, like Noah's words were worth anchoring to. That kind of attention wasn't subtle, it didn't hide itself, and Riley didn't try to tone it down either. If anything, he leaned into it more the longer they talked, like restraint wasn't part of his approach at all. Noah exhaled slowly. There was a difference between intensity and pressure, though, between attention and restriction. Riley didn't feel like he was taking space from Noah. He felt like he was offering his, and that was what made it complicated in a different way than anything Noah had been dealing with all morning, because nothing about Riley pulled him backward, nothing about him dragged old history into the present. He didn't feel like an echo of something unresolved. He felt like something new that didn't require comparison. Noah shifted slightly in his seat, finally setting the phone down in the cup holder as if physically distancing it might help him think more clearly. A wedding in a few hours, a date in a few hours, two different kinds of commitment are happening in parallel, neither asking for the other's permission to exist. And for the first time that day, Noah realized the strangest part wasn't that Tate was getting married. It was that his own life was still moving forward too. The phone rang again almost immediately after Noah set it down. He didn't even look at the screen at first. His body just reacted, automatic, hopeful in a way he didn't fully admit to himself. He reached for it quickly, a small smile already forming before he could stop it. Riley. Of course, it was Riley. The timing made sense. The kind of guy who forgot one more thing mid-conversation and called back instead of letting it sit. That was exactly him, uncomplicated, direct, a little impulsive in a way that felt strangely refreshing. Noah answered without thinking too hard. Hey, he said, already half laughing. Did you want to change the time or do it earlier, Riley? There was a beat of silence on the other end, then a voice spoke that wasn't Riley's at all. It's Talia, sweetheart. The smile left Noah's face so quickly that it almost felt physical. His grip tightened slightly on the phone. Oh, he said, straightening in the seat, I'm sorry, I thought you were somebody else. A brief pause followed and Noah could already feel the shift in tone before it even came. Talia didn't sound angry, that somehow made it worse. Who is Riley? She asked, gently but directly, like she was simply picking up a thread she hadn't expected to find. Noah exhaled through his nose, staring out at the driveway without really seeing it anymore. A guy I met on a gay cruise, he said honestly. Then, after a beat, he lives near here. I'm going on a date with him after lunch. There was a pause on the line, not judgmental, not sharp, just processing. Then Talia's voice softened in a way Noah recognized immediately. Oh, she said, and then warmer, I'm happy for you. Noah blinked slightly at that. He hadn't expected it to land so simply. Talia continued, almost lightly now but still sincere. You deserve a guy who worships the ground you walk on and offers you everything you've ever dreamed of. The words should have felt like an exaggeration, something dramatic or romantic in a way people said without meaning too much behind it. But coming from her, they didn't. They landed differently, like she was speaking from observation, not fantasy, like she had been watching Noah long enough to believe he had spent too many years settling for less than what he gave other people. Noah didn't respond right away. Emotions churned, surprise, vulnerability, a flicker of gratitude as his eyes drifted down to the steering wheel, then back up, as if grounding himself physically might help him process the abrupt change in conversation. Talia, he started but didn't finish the sentence. Because there wasn't a clear end to it. Instead, he swallowed and added more quietly, it's just a first date. On the other end, Talia gave a small hum, not dismissing it, not minimizing it either. Still, she said softer again, you sound lighter. That caught him off guard more than anything else. Noah leaned back slightly in his seat, staring out at the quiet street beyond his driveway. He didn't answer immediately because he wasn't sure how. Lighter wasn't a word he associated with himself today. And yet, something about the fact that she heard it anyway made it harder to dismiss, especially on a day that was supposed to belong entirely to Tate. Talia sighed on the other end of the line, and the sound carried more weight than Noah wanted it to. "Please, honey," she said quietly, "please come today, if for no other reason than your mom asking you to." There it was. Not pressure exactly, not manipulation, something softer than that and somehow harder to refuse because of it. The kind of request that didn't push, it just waited, patient, certain that if it stayed long enough something in Noah would give in. He could hear it in her silence after she spoke. The pause wasn't empty. It was full of expectation and she was trying not to say it out loud. Talia was waiting, hopping, maybe even bracing herself for disappointment but not quite ready to accept it yet. Noah stared out through the windshield again, the light outside too clean for how complicated everything felt inside the car. His hand tightened once around the phone, then loosened. He started, then stopped. Because the truth wasn't simple. It wasn't that he didn't care, or that he didn't understand what today meant to her or to the people who would be there. He did understand. He understood too well, maybe that was part of the problem. Understanding didn't automatically turn into willingness. Talia spoke again, softer now, almost careful. "I know it's not easy for you," she said. "I know there's history there. I'm not asking you to pretend none of that exists. A bit. I'm just asking you to show up." Noah closed his eyes for a second, exhaling slowly through his nose. Show up. As if that was the simplest thing in the world. As if being in the same room as Tate wouldn't rearrange everything he had spent the morning trying to steady inside himself. As if he could just step into that space and not feel the weight of everything unspoken between them pressing in from all sides. He pictured it anyway, against his will. The ceremony, the crowd, the careful order of it all, and Tate at the center of it, composed in that way he always was when something mattered publicly. Controlled, polished, present in a way that didn't necessarily mean accessible. And Noah, somewhere in the room, was trying not to react to the fact that none of it had included him in any meaningful way for a long time. Talia's voice softened again, almost pleading now without crossing into accusation. "It would mean a lot to me," she admitted, "just seeing you there." That was the part that made something in Noah's chest tighten. Not guilt exactly, something older than that, something tied to years of being folded into her life in ways that had never required explanation. She had always treated him like he belonged in the spaces that mattered, even when everything else between him and Tate had shifted. He opened his eyes again, gaze fixed on nothing in particular. "I don't want to make today about me not being there," he said finally, voice lower. A pause on the line. Then Talia carefully, "It already isn't about that, not really." Noah let out a quiet breath, almost a humorless laugh that didn't fully form. That wasn't entirely true, or maybe it was, depending on who you asked. Because absence always became part of the story, whether you intended it or not. He adjusted his grip on the phone, jaw tightening slightly. "I'm not trying to hurt you," he said after a moment. "I just don't think I can stand there and pretend everything is okay." Talia didn't interrupt. She never did when he finally said the thing he was actually thinking. Not after the way he left things, Talia. Silence again, not disagreement, not defense, just listening. And in that silence Noah could almost hear what she wasn't saying out loud, that she understood more than she was letting on but still hoped it could somehow be put aside for a few hours anyway. Finally, Talia spoke again, her voice smaller now. "I just want you there," she said, "that's all." Noah stared out at the driveway, the house beyond it still waiting, unchanged. And for a moment he didn't answer at all. Noah's voice came out steadier than he expected, but there was nothing calm in what he was saying. "I'm not a friend of the bride," he said, eyes fixed on the windshield. As if he looked anywhere else he might lose the thread. "And I'm not a friend of the groom. I'm nothing to the people that are getting married." Talia didn't interrupt. That silence made him keep going. "He doesn't want me there," Noah said, the words tightening as they came. Whatever reason he gave for the invitation, it wasn't nostalgia, it wasn't respect, because he didn't respect me when he left. His grip on the phone tightened again. "I don't want to celebrate anything about Tate," he continued, voice lower now but sharper. "I don't want to support something I can't and won't acknowledge." A pause, short and harsh. "And if I'm missed at the wedding," he added, "it's going to be by the people who didn't abandon me in the middle of the night. The people who didn't use me, the people who didn't say they cared and then proved otherwise." The words hung in the car after he finished, heavy enough that even the air seemed to change around them. For a moment there was nothing on the line except them. Then Talia exhaled softly, not offended, not defensive, just listening in a way that made it clear she was absorbing every piece of what he had just said, even the parts that hurt.